Curious Lloyd.
The Roswell Incident. Roswell is a small and sleepy village in the state of New Mexico, USA. The alleged UFO crash in Roswell is the mother of all UFO and alien presence in the universe. This is said to be the first major cover-up in history of mankind. So, let's see what was going on in Roswell. Roswell is obviously a highly divisive topic in ufology. People accept or reject it, often emotionally, for reasons which seem to the listener unclear, even after patient attention. The possibility of a crushed disc and the necessary astoundingly successful security required, alternatively violates or coheres with visions of reality held dear by the loudest and occasionally less civil discussants. But these deeper visions of reality, or what the writers and speakers of these schools want to believe, remain largely undescribed. I would like to pretend for a moment that such individuals and their constricting views of reality are not part of the serious Roswell exploration, as I believe they are not, no matter how much we are lumbered with them. 67 years ago, an incident occurred in the southwestern desert of the United States that could have significant implications for all mankind. The incident was announced by the US military, subsequently denied by the US military, and has remained veiled in government secrecy ever since. Although it is in a category fraught with false claims and hoaxes, it is not a hoax or a false claim, but rather a known event that is thoroughly documented. The event took place during the first week of July 1947 and involved the recovery of wreckage by the military from a remote ranch northwest of Roswell, New Mexico. There is now considerably testimony from former members of the military known to have been involved, including 2 brigadier generals, and the recovered materials were not terrestrial origin. On January the 12th, 1994, United States Congressman Stephen Schiff of Albuquerque, New Mexico, stated to the press that he had been stonewalled by the Defense Department when requesting information regarding the 1947 Roswell event on behalf of the constituents and witnesses, indicating he was seeking further investigation into the matter. Congressman Schiff called the Defense Department's lack of response astounding and concluded it was apparently another government cover-up. Detailed information on the recovery of the wreckage at Roswell and of the related events is extensive. Some years ago, investigators were able to obtain a copy of the 1947 Roswell Army Airfield Yearbook. This enabled them to locate witnesses throughout the country. Newspaper accounts show that during late June and early July 1947, there was a wave of reports of flying discs throughout the United States and Canada. Many of those reports came from credible witnesses, including pilots and other trained observers. Sometime during the first week of July 1947, a local New Mexico rancher, Mac Brazel, was riding out in the morning to check his sheep after a night of intense thunderstorms. He discovered a considerable amount of unusual debris. It had created a shallow gouge several hundred feet long and was scattered over a large area. Some of the debris had strange physical properties. After taking a few pieces to show his neighbor, Brazel drove into Roswell and contacted the sheriff. Sheriff George Wilcox notified authorities at the Roswell Army Airfield and, with assistance of his deputies, proceeded to investigate the matter. Shortly after becoming involved, the military closed off the area for a number of days and retrieved the wreckage. It was initially taken to Roswell Army Airfield and eventually flown out by a B-29 and a C-54 aircraft to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. Roswell Army Airfield was the home of the 509th Bomb Group, which was the elite outfit of the only atomic group in the world. On the morning of July the 8th, 1947, Colonel William Blanchard, commander of the 509th Bomb Group, issued a press release stating that the wreckage of a crushed disc had been recovered. The press release was transmitted over the wire services in time to make headlines in over 30 US afternoon newspapers the same day. Within hours, a second press release was issued from the office of General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force of Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas, 400 miles from the crash site. It rescinded the first press release and in effect claimed that Colonel Blanchard and the officers of the 509th Bomb Group at Roswell had made an unbelievable foolish mistake and somehow incorrectly identified a weather balloon and its radar reflector as the wreckage of the crushed disc. One of those 2 press releases had to be untrue. There is now solid testimony from numerous credible military and civilian witnesses who were directly involved that the crushed disc press release issued by Colonel William Blanchard of the 509th Bomb Group from Roswell was true, and the subsequent weather balloon press release from the 8th Air Force headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas was a hastily contrived cover story. Those who knew and worked with William Blanchard said he was a solid, no-nonsense, business-like individual, and was not someone who would make a fool of himself and the Air Force by ordering a press release about something as out of the ordinary and dramatic as the event at Roswell without being certain he was correct. In other words, if Blanchard issued a press release saying there was a crashed disc, there was a crashed disc. Colonel William Blanchard would later go on to become the 4-star general and vice chief of staff of the United States Air Force. The first witness located by investigators who was willing to testify and allow his name to be used was retired Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer of the 509th Bomb Group at Roswell. He was a highly competent individual and one of the first 2 military officers at the actual crash site. In a 1979 videotape interview, Jesse Marcel stated, "It was a weather balloon, nor was it an aeroplane or a missile. As to the exotic properties of some of the material," he stated, "it would not burn. That stuff weighs nothing. It's so thin, it isn't any thicker than the tin foil in a pack of cigarettes. So, I tried to bend the stuff. It wouldn't bend. We even tried making a dent in it with a 16-pound sledgehammer, and there was still no dent in it. It is inconceivable that a man of Jesse Marcel's qualifications and experience, the intelligence officer of the only atomic bomb group in the world, would have mistaken any kind of conventional wreckage, much less the remains of a weather balloon and its radar reflector, for that of a craft or a vehicle that, in his words, was not of this earth. Even if he had initially made such a gross misidentification, he would have certainly have been able to see his mistake later after it had been brought to his attention. When returning to the base, he stopped by his house with a few pieces of the unusual wreckage to show his wife and 11-year-old son. One piece, a small section of an I-beam, had strange hieroglyphic-like symbols on its surface. His son, Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr., now a practicing medical doctor and qualified National Guard helicopter pilot and flight surgeon, remembers the incident well. He has been able to produce detailed drawings of some of the symbols. During his career, Jesse Marcel went on to other important assignments, including the preparation of a report on the first Soviet nuclear detonation, which went directly to President Truman. The late General Thomas DuBose was a colonel and General Ramey's chief of staff at the 8th Air Force headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas in 1947. Before his death in 1992, General DuBose testified that himself had taken the phone call from General Clements McMullen at Andrews Army Airfield in Washington, D.C., ordering the cover-up. The instructions were for General Ramey to concoct a cover story to get the press off our backs. Retired General Arthur Exon was stationed at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, as a lieutenant colonel in July of 1947, during the time of the wreckage from Roswell was brought in. In a 1990 interview, General Exon said this of the testing: everything from chemical analysis, stress tests, compression tests, and flexing tests. It was brought into our material evaluation labs. Some of it could be easily ripped or changed. There were other parts of it that were very thin but awfully strong and could not be dented with a heavy hammer. Of the men that did the testing, he said, the overall consensus was that the pieces were from space. The testimony of Mr. Glenn Davis leaves little doubt about the nature of what was recovered in 1947. Glenn Davis still lives in Roswell, New Mexico, and is a respected businessman and a member of the community. He is down to earth and straightforward. In 1947, Glenn Davis was a young mortician working for Ballard Funeral Home, which had a contract to provide mortuary and ambulance services for Roswell Army Airfield. Prior to learning about the recovery of the unusual wreckage at Roswell, he received several phone calls one afternoon from the mortuary office at the airfield. He was asked about the availability of small hermetically sealed caskets and questioned about how to preserve bodies that had been exposed to the elements for several days. There was concern about possibly altering the chemical composition of the tissue. Later that evening, as a result of unrelated events, he made a trip to the base hospital. Outside the back entrance, he observed 2 military ambulances with open rear doors, from which large pieces of the wreckage protruded, including one with the row of unusual symbols on its surface. Once inside, he encountered a young nurse whom he knew. At the same instant, he was noticed by military police, who physically threatened him and forcibly escorted him from the building. He met with the nurse the next day, and she explained what had been going on at the hospital. She was a very religious person and was upset to the point of being in a state of shock. She had described how she had been called in to assist 2 doctors who were doing autopsies on these several small non-human bodies. She described the terrible smell, how one body was in good shape and the others mangled, and the differences between their anatomy and human anatomy. She also drew a diagram on a napkin showing the outline of their features. That meeting was to be their last. She was transferred to England a few days later. The main part of the craft apparently came down some distance from the debris field at the Brazel Ranch. Researchers were only recently available to confirm the second site because a few people knew about it. According to witness testimony, this is also the site where the bodies were found. Most of the witnesses to this site have not, in fear of a government reprisal, and allowed their names to be used. A prestigious law firm has recently been retained to provide legal counsel to such witnesses who might consider going to public with their testimony. Attorneys from the firm have already met with several Roswell witnesses. In addition to Glenn Dennis, other witnesses were physically threatened or intimidated. According to members of Sheriff Wilcox's family, he was told by the military in the presence of his wife he and his entire family would be killed if he ever spoke about what he had seen. The rancher who originally discovered the wreckage, Mac Brazel, was sequestered by the military for almost a week and sworn to secrecy. He never spoke about the incident again, even to his family. In the months following the incident, his son Bill Brazel found and collected a few scraps of the material, which he kept in a cigar box. The material was eventually confiscated by the military. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and possibly subscribe, and I'll catch you next week with another video. Rami. Roger, Rami.